Now we're actively blocking Kurdish sales of oil, for example. We're actively blocking Kurdish soft partition. Yeah.
So I guess it's your opinion almost that if you start to promote economic freedom or economic equality in the sense of these warring sects kind of coexisting in a more freer economy where they all have to interact with each other on an economic level, if you promote that, that will move us closer to a climate that is easier to make do things like Spencer was talking about to create more stable governments.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to promote individual freedom. I mean, the main thing most people want to do in these conflict territories is leave. So U.S. policy is to not let them leave or to put them in refugee camps. So we're blocking people escaping right now. So our first interest should be the people, not the government. Allowing people to escape would be one proposal, and I'll talk about refugee stuff here more. But yeah, so we don't know the answer to how to promote economic freedom. But, you know, the people in the Council on Economic Advisors say the people in the State Department and the military don't understand economics. That's why they continue to do stupid things. So promoting economic understanding of development is what I would call for in the U.S. government first, and make sure our policy doesn't repress reforms, which our current policies do. Yeah.
What about kind of the international community, specifically the UN? I've heard one of your talks before on how the UN can hinder developing countries based on the regulation. So specifically in the issue of like the Middle East, where does the UN specifically play in preventing or promoting economic freedom?
You know, to some extent, the UN is sort of irrelevant in most things now. But in refugee policy, the Refugee Commission, they're involved in that in various ways. The UN, the International Labor Organization, is part of the UN, is specifically trying to stop refugees from working, arguing they're hurting local workers and so on and so forth. But I don't know the best answer to that. You know, you have when you had the UN debate topic, one of the reforms was to have a smaller UN of democracies. So because the problem now is when you have constant attacking of Israel in the UN because there's more Arab countries than there are Jewish countries, and you have the Human Rights Commission with, you know, people like Gaddafi and others on it. And so how do you reform that sort of thing? The UN is a problem. All these international institutions obviously have problems. Yeah, so I'll talk about some of the responses to this in various ways here. Okay, does that handle some of the questions? So I'm arguing that our current system is problematic. Another approach to affirmatives is to reduce the U.S. role in the Middle East. We're in there because of the Carter Doctrine. The Carter Doctrine basically says the U.S. will regard any effort to reduce flows of oil from the Middle East as an attack on the U.S. because we were very dependent on oil during Carter administration, and so we still have that. Except now, I mean, there's arguments against that even then, but now we don't need much oil from the Middle East. Most of it goes to China. The shale oil boom is expanding dramatically, and so we have less use for Middle East oil. So what's the U.S. role in the Middle East? Well, it could be, well, we're making sure that the flow of oil continues. We're providing sort of the world's policeman on that. But in considering that, we did that before because the feeling was we needed oil, and now we don't. So that's a huge change just in the last 5 years. Like 5 years ago, like nobody expected the shale boom to go as big as it is. Now we're exporting oil like crazy. So it's a very interesting story, yeah. Well, first, you sort of back up and look at U.S. foreign policy and say, what's our role in the Middle East strategically? The military should be protecting America. So again, first off, this is the big debate, and this is Rand Paul is in this now against Rick Perry, where Rick Perry calls Rand Paul an isolationist. Isolationist is what you call people when you're against their policies. Non-interventionist is what you call them when you're in favor of their policies. So the non-interventionists say we should do what Washington, Jefferson, the founding fathers said, not be involved in the internal affairs of other countries, not get involved in European wars, don't get involved in another land war in Asia, those sorts of things. And that the international relations theory say trade and commerce will allow things to work, right? Just trade and commerce will push for peace. And background to this, it used to really matter. When you conquered a country, it used to be a really good thing for the country, right? You'd conquer some country and you'd get 100,000 acres of land where you could grow food and increase your prosperity. Or you'd capture oil wells and factories. But now, wealth doesn't come from land, right? Anybody with farmers, you spend all this money subsidizing your farmers. Farmers seem to make you poor. I'm sorry if there's any farmers in the audience. But wealth doesn't come from just land or from factories. Wealth is different now. Hong Kong being an example of a very wealthy place. China could have conquered Hong Kong and conquered Taiwan, and they're both desolate, worth nothing, worth very little. It's freedom and technology that creates wealth. So the impetus to war is much less than it used to be. Yeah.
You're basically, I understand the argument that the Middle East, we don't necessarily need the Middle East oil, but why would we cut off trade with the Middle East oil?
So yeah, I wouldn't be against it, embargoing or anything like that. I'm simply saying that we could consider pulling back and saying we don't need to spend money making sure the Middle East is safe. Trying to keep the trade lines open. Now this is a very debatable point, because if you pull out the US fleet, then maybe Iran steps in and starts blowing things up, or maybe Somali pirates come in. You need some sort of security there. And maybe we want to have that role, having the US fleet there providing a sort of historical, like the British Navy used to. But the challenge is, if we go invading a territory in support of this group or that group, stopping chemical battles in Syria by stepping in, or stepping in Iraq, or stepping into the new ISIS group, we could send in paratroopers and stop that, in a few days. Or maybe it would take 10 years. I mean, so those sorts of challenges. What should our role be? Well, all I'm saying is, we shouldn't use oil as an explanation for why we're there. That was a justification before, and it was reasonable, if not necessarily justifiable. I mean, it was their oil, so we can't say we'll take it if we need it, that sort of stuff. Okay, so you could argue we don't need to do that. You could argue we should focus on refugees, focus on getting people out of the Middle East when there's conflict. We could argue reforming US policy. There's a whole bunch of things. One of the things to look at is the trade, the Suez Canal and trade, the central role. This is a chart of trade throughout the world and weight of commerce. So the U.S. has the Middle East is very important here. Just a little background. For understanding why the Middle East is sort of backward, this book, The Long Divergence, I would argue is the best. Basically, Islam and Islamic merchants flourished in the first centuries. Now, they conquered through military, through fighting, but also they were wealthy because of trade and commerce. This is a religion founded by a businessman, pro-commerce. The question is, why did Islam fall apart or fall behind? So Islam, they're still merchants, very entrepreneurial. I was talking to my father last week, who used to do business in Saudi Arabia. And he's in Saudi Arabia in the, I think it was in the 80s or 90s, and he was selling construction port equipment that was unloading ports. And he says, everyone you deal with in Saudi Arabia in business is Palestinian. They basically run things. And the entrepreneurs from the Middle East, the Palestinians, the Lebanese, are dominant forces. Carlos Slim, the wealthiest guy in the world in Mexico, he's Lebanese, right? His family left Lebanon in turmoil, moved to Mexico, and he's the wealthiest guy in the world. There are very wealthy Lebanese, Palestinians, Jordanians all around the world. So why in the Middle East did they fall so far behind with a strong merchant background?